Good morning and welcome. I'm Councillor Andrew Cooper from Kirklees Council, where I chair the Environment and Climate Change Scrutiny Panel, and I'll be chairing the session today. We have over 240 registered attendees for this webinar, which is terrific. You can submit questions through the Q&A function. The chat function is disabled for this webinar. You can upvote, stroke like, any questions which you would also like answered. We're using live captions so that the session is fully accessible. You can enable these via the More tab, followed by Language and Speech, then click Show Live Captions. Slides will be available on the LGA website after the event if used, and only when authorised. We'll be recording the session on this occasion to enable you to look back at the tool demonstrations which will take place during the session and due to the many requests we have received. This event is sponsored by the Crown Commercial Service and we are grateful to them for their support. The greenhouse gas accounting tool has been popular with councils since its launch in 2020. And this is the latest of the series of well-attended webinars to introduce new users to the tools and to share updates with councils who've been using the tool to report progress. We hope that you enjoy this session, and without further ado, I'm going to invite Hugh Russell from Local Partnerships to speak.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Hello, everyone. My name is Hugh Russell. I'm a director in the climate team at Local Partnerships. I'm going to be talking to you about the 2 free tools that we have available for you. But before that, I'll just introduce Local Partnerships briefly. We're a public sector consultancy owned by the Local Government Association, Treasury and the Welsh Government. And Rachel, Sarah and I work in the climate unit. We have many years' experience between us of supporting central and local government on climate issues, including the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. For those who are newer to greenhouse gas emissions accounting, our tool is aligned to the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. Greenhouse Gas Protocol organisation provides standards, guidance, tools and training for businesses and governments to measure and manage climate warming emissions. You can see a diagram on screen which show the different greenhouse gas emissions. And just before I go into that, I'll just mention that the Climate Change Committee announced in late June that we're making good progress in relation to emissions. They reduced by 2.5% in 2024, and we've reduced by over half since 1990. We do work in challenging circumstances though, so Durham County Council announced yesterday that they would be cancelling their climate emergency. So we are making good progress in relation to greenhouse gas emissions, but as I say, we work in challenging circumstances. So you can see on the screen the 3 different scopes. So scope 1, that's the green arrow in the middle, are direct greenhouse gas emissions which occur from sources that are owned or controlled by the organisation that are doing the accounting. For example, emissions from combustion in buildings or vehicles. Scope 2 are quite specific. They're indirect greenhouse gas emissions from the generation of purchased electricity consumed by the organisation doing the accounting. That's the grey arrow on the left there. And scope 2 emissions physically occur at the facility where electricity is generated, for example, an energy from waste plant. Scope 3 are other indirect greenhouse gas emissions, which can be around 80% of an organisation's emissions, so a large chunk. There's 2 purple arrows on screen there. The upstream scope 3 is on the left, which are emissions that occur prior to engagement by the organisation in question, and downstream, the purple arrow on the right, which are emissions that occur following engagement by the organisation doing the accounting. Scope 3 emissions are a consequence of the activities of the organisation that occur from sources not owned or controlled by the organisation. You can see at the top right of the screen the cover of the Greenhouse Gas Protocol standard that is the standard for the industry and which our tools are based on. As Andrew mentioned, the first greenhouse gas accounting tool was launched in 2020 with the support of the Local Government Association and the Carbon Disclosure Project, and BEIS as they then were. The idea was to produce a standardised approach for accounting that's free to use for the public sector, and it's designed to be used by all authorities regardless of how much carbon accounting council has done, wherever you are on the emissions accounting journey. BEIS obviously became DESNZ, and the DESNZ carbon emissions factors are contained in the tool. We update these every year when they're published in June or July. So councils should download the tool annually to ensure that you're using the latest emissions factors. And ideally, you should update your accounts each year so you can compare year on year the carbon footprint of the council and align your reporting periods with the financial year. And we do encourage you to share your completed tool and calculator with us so we can add it to the LG Inform website, which is a really useful website where councils can look to see what other councils are doing, and then you can possibly contact an individual council to talk to them in more detail about something and to learn from each other. In terms of the type of information that you need to insert in the tool, on the screen there you can see an excerpt from the spreadsheet that makes up the greenhouse gas accounting tool, and you need to enter various consumption data for the types of fuel that produces emissions. So gas and electricity consumption is measured in kilowatt hours, and regarding council fleet vehicles, you can record the type of vehicle and the type of fuel, plus the amount of fuel used or the mileage. Information regarding your grey fleet, i.e. employee-owned vehicles which are regularly used for business travel, can also be added. And the tool will use the conversion factors to calculate the emissions, which are tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. And then the tool will produce tables and pie charts. We've got new versions of those that you can see on the screen. And these are really helpful in conveying information to non-expert audiences. So if you're producing reports for members, if you're sending things to the media, if you want to make this information really accessible, then these are useful. Rachel and Sarah will go into more detail on what we've produced for the 2025 update, which is on our website now. But I'll just summarise it here. As I mentioned, we've put the latest emissions factors in. We've updated our guidance, so we think it's clearer. There's more explanations throughout. We've now included well to tank reporting for Scope 3 reporting with a clearer link to the waste emissions calculator. We think the user experience has been improved. There's guidance on each tab, and running totals of the emissions are shown. So we think that's quite helpful. The presentation we think's been improved. As I mentioned, the new tables and summary charts are in there, and we always regularly update the frequently asked questions. We've got some decision trees for boundary setting, which Rachel will go into. And we do really encourage you to keep giving us feedback, because this is an iterative tool. We want to know how you want to see the tools develop. And the greenhouse gas accounting mailbox is the email address to contact, and I believe that will be put in the Q&A at some point during this session. So please do keep telling us what you like about the tools, what you want to see improved, and how we can develop them further to help you. Sarah will go into more detail about the waste emissions calculator later, but I just wanted to introduce this as something that was created a couple of years ago with some funding from the LJ under the Net Zero Innovation Programme. This is a past programme, so there's no funding available under that anymore. But this was to help councils develop their Scope 3 reporting in relation to waste emissions, which can be 30 to 40% of a council's emissions, and often financially the biggest contract that a waste disposal authority in particular will have. But just wanted to point out that our tool should not be used for forecasting future infrastructure needs. So there are other commercially available tools in the market that are widely used in the waste sector. For example, the RATE tools, that's WRATE, that's managed by a company called Golders Associates. And that can be very helpful if you're looking at future infrastructure needs. But our tools are great free starting points for you to account for your emissions and to look at how you can make interventions towards net zero. I will hand back to Andrew.
Okay, thanks, Hugh. Next is Rachel Torson-Hewer from Local Partnerships to give a demonstration of the Greenhouse Gas Accounting Toolkit and updates to Scope 3 guidance.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Hugh. So what I will start with is just a quick overview of what has been updated in the guidance. So we can flash that up on the screen now. So Hugh mentioned that we have our mailbox, the Greenhouse Gas Accounting mailbox, and I'm really pleased to say that that is really well used, and it's really important for us to have an ongoing dialogue with you around the tools that we've collaborated with the LGA and CCS to develop and to keep updated year after year in terms of what you need. And certainly one of the most frequent of our frequently asked questions that comes through into the mailbox is around boundary setting, and particularly around what should be included in Scope 3 reporting. So to further support you, we've developed Scope 3 guidance, which is available via the LGA's web pages in relation to general Scope 3 reporting and also for social care. But what we thought would be handy to incorporate into the frequently asked questions document is some decision tree type guidance to help you with drawing your reporting boundary, particularly as to what should be in your Scope 3 in your Scope 3 report. So what you can see on the screen here is the more general decision tree, which you can apply to your leased assets. You can apply this to your outsourced services and, for example, social housing. So the decision trees are here to support your decision making. So this isn't kind of the be all and end all. If you need to make a different decision for whatever reason, you are able to do so. The next one is specifically related to schools, because schools has been a bit of a conundrum for a lot of local authorities as to whether they should be captured within Scope 3 reporting, and even then under operational Scope 3 or in your area-wide reporting. And that's from a number of reasons, really, relating to devolution of school budgets, academisation, more schools converting to academies, the loss of control from the local authority as to what happens in those buildings, and the availability of data where schools are, particularly academy trusts, are purchasing their utility supplies outside of central local authority contracts. So what we've got here is a number of different scenarios for you in relation to schools to aid your decision making and to support you in justifying any exclusions that you may make. And I'll come on to where you can capture some of that when I do the demo of the tool. So this has been updated in the FAQ document, which will be it's uploaded with the toolkit itself on the local partnerships webpage, so you'll be able to access it there. But it's also you'll have it in this slide pack, which will be available after the session as well. So without further ado, what I will bring up now is the toolkit itself and give you a tab-by-tab walkthrough of all the functionality for some of you who may be new to the tool, and to share what we've done by way of updates for 2025. So if I could just get a quick thumbs up from one of the team that's displaying correctly on the screen for you. Perfect, thank you, Sarah. So the first tab should be for users of the tool fairly familiar to you. We haven't updated this very much at all. So you are able here to select your reporting year. So the emissions factors that are included in the tool will go up to the current year that are made available following the publication by DESNZ, but all the emissions factors for previous years going back to 14-15 are embedded in the tool, so that you can use this to calculate and store your previous year's emissions. You can put your reporting year start and end dates. All the local authorities are in the drop down here. So for this example, I will pick, let's go with Cambridgeshire. So you can capture here who's prepared your report and the date of completion. There's some general guidance in the front there, and a disclaimer about the use. The tool is not for commercial use by outside consultants. This 2025 Scope Guidance tab has had somewhat of a refresh, so I'll walk you through what's updated in here. So you've got the live link to the FAQ on this front page here. You've got some guidance around your reporting year and the definition as set out in the Greenhouse Gas Protocol around reporting boundaries. What we've also now included in here is an updated table to capture what you are reporting and under which scope. So you are able to select from this drop down in this table all of the reporting tables that are available in the workbook itself. You are able to select and record whether that is via in-house delivery, outsourced, or a combination. The data availability and quality and where you've sourced your data from. So whether that's your own data held by the local authority or provided by a contractor or supplier, and whether it's partial data or estimated. Your data source. And if I scroll along here to the second half of the table, where you are excluding a particular data set, you are able to select an exclusion reason here. So the options range from data available but not provided by the contractor or provider, data has significant gaps or accuracy concerns, data not collected for contract monitoring if it's an outsourced service, data is impractical to collect, for example, some waste data. The supply is not part of the council supply contracts, or you have a free type option for other. You are able then to state here whether it's included in your reporting boundary, yes, no, or no, but we plan to include, and which reporting tab you are including that data set under. If you have selected an option here that says that is a no, it's not put my teeth in, sorry. It's not included in your reporting boundary. This will automatically populate. Oh, that's embarrassing. That's not working now. It automatically populates a tab, a box here, which says a suggested action required. So the suggested action requires will suggest that you undertake data validation if you've got significant gaps or accuracy concerns, or if the data is not available, that you should review your contracts or KPIs with your supplier to identify opportunities for data provision. And then you have a free type box at the end here to add some further detail to your decision and capture your next steps in relation to data collection. So the scopes 1 and 2 and 3 tabs have had a bit of a refresh and a facelift. So what you've got on all of the reporting tabs now is you have a collapsible guidance column down the side here. This has guidance notes related to all the tables within the tool to give you where your data source may be, some words about the units of measurement within the reporting tab, so that you don't need to keep flicking backwards and forwards to the FAQ document, which still remains available, but we've put guidance within each tab for you here. What you will also see at the top, and this is a new feature, is the reporting year pulls through onto every tab, the authority name. You've got your total for each reporting tab here, and the running total for all of your tabs at the top of every, displayed at the top of every tab here for ease. The scope. Why is this not? Some display issues here on this today. Bear with me a second. The best days plans, it worked in the rehearsal. Here we go. Right, so the scope 3 tab, as you can see here, we've got the guidance column down the side, which gives you notes against each table. And again, you've got your running totals up at the top here. Scope 3 tab, again, you've got your guidance column, you've got your running totals up at the top. We have made some changes to how these tables function. So rather than having the full list in the table and then you having lots of empty boxes in the table as you complete it, you can now select the option that you're reporting against so that the table and the display is much cleaner and that pulls through into the collated reporting. You will also be very pleased to see that we have now included, as part of the Scope 3 reporting, well-to-tank data collection tables. So these are auto-populated from your Scope 1 inputs, and there is well-to-tank calculations for each category here. So we have included that by popular demand, as again, that was also one of our most frequently requested updates. We have an additional tab in here now for a slicker link to the waste emissions calculator. So you're able to put your top level numbers from the waste emissions calculator in here. And Sarah will be explaining further about that one. The outsourced Scope 3 tabs that we added in last year's update have remained. So you're able to put your contract name in the top here. Again, these have all had a bit of a facelift, but the functionality remains the same. And then the summary tables, which you will have seen a snapshot from in Hugh's presentation. Again, you've got the guidance column down the side here, which gives you instructions as to how you can change the displays. You've got a much cleaner summary table at the top here. We've got an updated chart for you here in relation to your emissions summary. And down here, rather than having that, if for previous users of the tool, if you remember, we had a huge long table of every single possible line that you could report on within the workbook included in the summary table. So now what this does is just pulls through the lines from the workbook that you have entered data into. So you've got a much cleaner summary table that you can pull out and use, copy and paste into your reporting. So the display charts have the ability to change the display. So you're able to show different cuts of your data. Oh my goodness. There's the clear button. It works so well in the rehearsal. Okay, that's a tab by tab work through of the toolkit itself. I'm going to pause there. I can bring it back up in the Q&A if there are any questions. But just to summarize the updates that we've made, it has had quite a significant refresh. The guidance is dotted throughout the toolkit now in that collapsible sidebar, and the initial tab for capturing your reporting categories has been included. You've got the additional reporting categories for well to tank and the inclusion of the waste emissions calculator summary. You've got your running totals across the top, and you've got new charts in the summary tables display. So at that point, I shall stop and hand over to Mark for an overview of, oh no, back to Andrew to introduce Mark. You're on mute, Andrew.
Yeah, thanks for that, Rachel. And we now hand over to Mark Brammer from Rochdale Borough Council to talk about his experience of using the tool. Over to you, Mark.
Thanks, Andrew. I'll just bring my slides up. Has that come up? Can people see that?
Yeah, we can see that, Mark.
If you can just make it full screen, that would be great. Thank you.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Right.
Perfect.
Okay, I'll take you through a quick canter about through the way we've used the GHG accounting tool. Of necessity, I'll try and keep it as brief as possible to keep to time and hopefully focus on some of the issues, some of the, that we found at the end. So I intend to kind of just give you a quick update on a summary of our emissions outputs from the last reporting year, talk about our emissions over the time period that we've been collecting using the tool, focus a little bit on the Scope 1, Scope 2 emissions analysis. I'm going to talk about Scope 3 as well briefly in terms of where we're at with that, and then how we've used it in terms of our own reporting dashboard, and then some, as I said, a summary of key issues. So this first slide has a table in it. This is just a summary of our operational carbon emissions for 23-24 using the outputs from the tool itself. You'll note that not all of the categories within the accounting tool are included here, and that's basically because we just don't collect currently the data for that. So from our reporting, we exclude that, but we make it clear in reporting why that's the case. So our emissions, Scope 1 includes all the heating from our buildings, all of our corporate contracts. It excludes academies. Now, I'll come back to that later. It includes all of our fleet, and one of the things to note there is over the reporting period, we've now insourced our highway maintenance services, so the fleet has been added to our kind of Scope 1. In terms of our indirect emissions, I guess, we could cheat and claim that because we're on a green energy tariff, it's 100% clean electricity, but we don't do that. We treat it as grid purchased electricity. And it also includes the council's electric fleet of vehicles. And of course, we don't want to omit the mayor's car from that, which is an electric vehicle. And obviously, the renewable energy we generate from our own assets reduces our dependence on grid electricity, and we've now got a 5.5 megawatt solar farm which is fully operational, and we've probably got over 1.9 megawatts of solar installed on our buildings and schools as well, so that obviously reduces our dependence, and we expect that to reduce over a period of time. So our indirect emissions, staff business mileage, I'll come back to that later. We do a calculation around working from home as well, which we stole from Wigan Council, but a few of the districts in Greater Manchester use the same calculation. And then things like water usage, T&D, and our outsourced Scope 3. So this next slide contains a bar graph, but this just shows our total emissions over the period we've been collecting the data. You'll see it's not linear. Some of that, I'll come back to an explanation of that. Some of it is just because we've been collecting more data. We've had to do some data cleansing over that period of time as well to get it more accurate. So it's probably reflects the fact that we've improved our reporting systems over later years. But however, it does show from our baseline year that we've reduced our operational carbon emissions by around 7%. In terms of our Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions, I just wanted to focus a little bit on this. So this is, primarily our heating of our buildings, our fleets, our electricity consumption. This is the split between them. An interesting thing to note is that in the COVID year, and I suppose this is about how you use the data as well. It's like interesting. Why is heating our buildings gone up during the COVID year? And of course, basically, we still had to, even though buildings weren't occupied, and particularly schools, we still had to heat those buildings during that period of time. But it took us a certain while to get my head around that. In terms of that was a bit odd, really, when you look at the electricity consumption. But overall, the other thing about 21-23, that was really the first year we started collecting our Scope 3 emissions. So I guess later in this period of time, you can actually see some of the trends developing. Just a quick summary of some of the reasons we've looked at around, this isn't everything, but some of the main ones about reductions in our Scope 1 and Scope 2. So energy costs, whilst they were high during the energy crisis, they reduced, they've fallen back, but they're still higher than pre-COVID. And building owners and users are much more conscious about the amount of energy used. So that's been a factor in terms of reduction of our energy. Another is we've had relatively mild winters, as testified by the Met Office. And of course, that's meant less heating being used for our public buildings and schools. Another factor is the energy contracts, particularly for schools. Even though it's not massive, schools buy back into corporate energy contracts, but they have delegated budgets, and that does tend to vary year on year in terms of the SLAs. So that's another factor. Scope 3 emissions, we shifted our academies. We now treat that as part of our Scope 3 emissions. So earlier in the reporting period, they were part of our kind of Scope 1, Scope 2, and that's just the way we've dealt with the boundaries around Scope 3. And another one to mention is that we've invested a lot in our public buildings, public sector decarbonisation, 18 public buildings, and that has had an impact upon our Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. I can't go at length into that now, but that's another factor. In terms of our Scope 3 emissions, just very, very quickly, the reason our Scope 3 emissions have gone up, and they are the bulk of our emissions, even though we're not collecting all of our Scope 3 emissions, the 4.5% higher than when we really started collecting in 21-22. It's just because we're collecting more data. So we've got, academies and our leisure trust included in that. And obviously that potentially distorts that trend, but we're just incrementally trying to increase the amount of data we collect. We create a dashboard from the data which we report to our senior leadership team, and it goes to scrutiny as well. This is just an example of the way in which we try and report some of that data to our members, along with a narrative report. So this again is a table and a bar graph. So that's how we try and use it. And I'll very quickly summarise what I think are the key points. We do not have a carbon accounting team within the council. It's basically me and business support, and I've recently lost my business support officer, so that's the person who does most of the work here has now gone. So the LGA and local partnerships accounting tool, it's a really useful, very straightforward, consistent and easy to use tool. That's why we basically do it. Main requirements internally about us ensuring we've got robust systems for collecting the data, and I think Rachel touched on that previously, and that's obviously a process we're going through in terms of ensuring that it's properly audited and that we're cleansing the data. I think people should not underestimate the resource requirements for collecting and cleansing that data. I would say we are very analog. It's a very manual system. I was at a presentation yesterday. Stockport are very good at this. They've kind of digitized everything in terms of the collection of data. We're not on that scale. Street lighting are absolutely brilliant because it's so they can report quarterly, monthly, annually, and it's easy to use from a carbon reporting point of view, but that's not the same for all of our other services. It does allow us to share data and measure progress across the Greater Manchester districts, and we don't try and benchmark, but we do try and share best practice, really, particularly what's in and out of scope. We're not using all of the functionality of the tool at the moment. Power BI, we're going to have a look at. Scope 3, we need to expand. The waste emissions tool, even though we wanted to do that in the last reporting period, we had lengthy discussions with environmental management, and most of that is at the waste disposal level, at a Greater Manchester Waste Disposal Authority level. And we gave up last year basically because we could not get that data for a borough council level, but we're going to revisit as part of 24-25. So we're increasing incrementally our data collection around Scope 3, but that makes year-on-year comparison quite difficult because we're not backdating some of that data. There is a need for consistency about reporting outsourced Scope 3. So as I said before, we've moved Academy Trusts from Scope 1 and 2 into Scope 3. We took a decision about that. Not every authority takes the same view about that, but we treat that as supplies and services to schools. And we're not using it currently for CDP or for the Covenant of the Mayors reporting. That's done at a Greater Manchester level, not helped recently by Desnes's decision, I think, to discontinue with the Scatter tool, so who produced the inventories for CDP reporting. But that's something that we will revisit in the future. Hopefully that's a quick canter through. Andrew, I know we're taking questions at the end, so that's the end of my presentation.
Okay, thanks, Mark, for that. The next speaker is Sarah Wilkinson from Local Partnerships, who will be taking us through the waste emissions calculator. Over to you, Sarah.
Thank you very much, Andrew, and good morning, everybody. So while we just get to the beginning of the slides, thank you very much, Hugh. I shall be talking a bit about the waste emissions calculator, my experience of using the tool, and what has changed in the 2025 update. And I will then go and give you a live demo of the waste emissions calculator tool. So this is another tool that we've got, which is also free and available for you to use. So yes, the waste emissions calculator, as I say, it's free for local authorities. The target audience for this one is specifically waste disposal authorities. If you are a district council and you are only responsible for waste collection, you might find that you don't need this tool because all your waste related functions can probably be captured in the main greenhouse gas accounting tool, which would be related to vehicles and transport. However, if you are a waste disposal authority, a county council or a unitary authority, this tool is going to be very useful to you to cover emissions from waste disposal and treatment of the household waste from residents. The treatment options that are covered within the tool, there is a transportation tab there, which you might have additional transport between sites and transfer stations, whatever. Recycling is only designed for sites for sorting, shredding, baling and preparation. It doesn't cover the actual recycling process by third-party off-takers. We do cover anaerobic digestion, we cover composting, we cover mechanical biological treatment, incineration or energy from waste, and there are two different methods to calculate emissions from landfill, which I will talk about a bit later. And then you can see a summary or a total for all of those different treatment and disposal options. So next slide, thank you. So in terms of why this tool was needed as a separate tool specifically just for waste disposal, it is waste emissions are much more complicated to calculate than other emissions. So your emissions from energy use or transport are fairly relatively, in the scheme of things, straightforward. You've got an emissions factor, which is published by DESNZ. You multiply that by your consumption details, and that tells you your emissions. Very simple in the scheme of things. But waste is I say, a lot more complicated, especially with processes like landfill, where the emissions depend on your composition of the waste and the breakdown of that waste in landfill, or if you've got incineration, again, depending on the composition of your waste. So we do need a more specific method. You can't use the DESNZ carbon conversion factors for waste for treatment of household waste. You can use them for your own waste. So if you're talking about the waste from the council's the bins in the council's own offices, for example, that's fine. You can use them for that. That's what they're there for your organisation's own waste. But as a local authority, when you've got a responsibility for dealing with household waste, that's different. So you need something a lot more specific. So that's what this tool is designed to provide. Next slide. The benefits of using this tool, it can enhance your understanding. You can find out which of your waste processes are causing the most carbon emissions. You can use it to set a baseline. If you've not done that before, develop a Scope 3 baseline specifically for your waste service and use that to compare future years. You can then analyze and track your progress. You can, if you do this recalculator each year, you can then see how your waste emissions have changed from year to year. And you can report on performance, whether that's an internal report or whether it's tracking against your net zero targets, or you might have contract KPIs with your waste contractors. You might want to use it for that purpose. Next slide. So this tool, the original version of it was developed, I think, I put 2020-21, I'm not sure exactly, but around about that time, by Cambridgeshire County Council and University College London through an LGA funded Net Zero Innovation Project. And I was working for Cambridgeshire County Council at that time, and I was involved in the project which originally developed the first version of that tool. So my previous role at Cambridgeshire included leading on greenhouse gas emissions accounting and reporting for all of the council, including waste. So we developed this tool and used that to work out the carbon footprint of the waste disposal service at Cambridgeshire. And obviously since then it's developed, it's come along quite a long way, and it's now available for all local authorities to use. Now, I joined local partnerships in 2024 last year, and I've now been using this calculator to assist other local authorities and for other projects too. Next slide. So I'm currently working with Westmoreland and Furness Council. So I just thought I'd, and I've got their permission to use this as an example. Westmoreland and Furness, of course, a unitary authority created in 2023 after a reorganisation in that area to replace 3 former district councils and part of the former Cumbria County Council into one new unitary council. Now, they are currently consulting on changes to their waste collections with the aim to harmonise services across all 3 of their areas. Local partnerships are supporting the council's waste team with development of the business case for the waste change programme, and carbon impact is one of the council's key criteria for assessing the proposed changes. So we've used the waste emissions calculator tool to help them develop a baseline so they can understand the carbon impact of the council's current waste services and then be able to compare that for future years. I will say the biggest challenge was gathering all of the required data, and that was the same challenge I had when I was at Cambridgeshire, and I expect, and it's the same that Mark mentioned, and I expect many of others of you will have the same challenge. It's not the maths, it's getting the data in the first place. So on the right of that slide, there's just a pie chart. This is not necessarily the final results. This is just to indicate that some of the type of information you can get back, and that would include a pie chart which shows what proportion of emissions are from different waste treatment types. Next slide. So in terms of what data you will need, there is a lot of data that you will need to get a fuller picture. And I would say if you haven't got all of this data, don't let that stop you from making a start and having a try. And you might find that it was still able to give you a rough idea and a starting point for at least some of your waste emissions processes. And you can build on that the more data that you then gather in future. This is a free tool that you can download and use by yourself, but if you would like more support with that, that is a service that we offer, an additional service that we offer, so you can come to us and we can help you with calculating your waste emissions as well. So the type of data you'll need is mostly around the tonnage of waste that is going to the different treatment options. So that should be data that you have anyway somewhere, and the quantity of electricity and fuels used on the waste treatment sites. That may be difficult to get hold of. You may have to ask your contractors for that data. But again, I find that in most cases, the majority of emissions is from the waste processes itself rather than your fuels used. So that's not the end of the world, but if you have got it, it will make your answer a lot more accurate. Again, waste composition data, that is required for incineration or energy from waste and for landfill. If that's not available, the tool, the calculator is designed to use a UK average residual waste composition. So it will calculate what your emissions would be if your waste was the same as the UK average composition. But if you've got your own composition analysis, that will make it more accurate. Okay, next slide. In terms of what's changed in the 2025 update, now for those of you who have used the waste emissions calculator before, you may notice a few small changes here and there. Big one, of course, is the annual update to the 2025 emissions factors. Now those are published for fuel and electricity use and vehicles. Those are published each year by DESNZ, so the 2025 factors are now included. I should have said this tool goes back to 2019, but you'll see that in a moment in the demo. We've updated the guidance so there's clearer wording and explanations throughout. Well to tank emissions are now separated in the transport and the recycling tab, so you can see separated the results for fuel use and for well to tank, which is a request we had from another council user, so that's available there for everyone should that be useful to you. Composting, previously you had to select from a drop-down box one or the other type of composting, whether you were using open window or in vessel. And we did have some feedback that some councils are using both. They send some waste to each, so that the option to select for both is now available. We've done some corrections to how avoided emissions are treated in energy from waste, and we've done some minor sort of edits and fixes here and there where we've found some small minor errors to correct. Next slide. I think that's it for my slides. I'm now going to switch to show you the tool and talk through it. So bear with me one moment. Okay, hopefully everybody can see that. Someone can give me a thumbs up. One of my colleagues. Thank you, Andrew. Right, so you'll see we've got a series of tabs along the bottom here. I'll start off on the guidance tab. So there's a bit of general guidance at the top. You can enter the name of your local authority here and select the year of appraisal. So this tool goes back to 2019. If you're working on a financial year, say 2024 to 25, you would select 2024 to select the closest calendar year. So let's leave it on 2025, the most recent year that it's got. And throughout all the tabs, if it's this lime green color, that's where it wants you to enter some data. So I'll go over to the transportation tab now. Again, we've got some guidance at the top. So the first green bit here, now for transport, there's two different methods. Method one is if you've got fuel consumption data. That is the most accurate method for calculating emissions from transport. So if you have got that, then always use that if you can. So you might just put, yeah, we've got a load of vehicles using diesel, and we know that we've used 5,000 litres of diesel, and that will automatically calculate the emissions in the box there. If I just scroll along, yeah, that diesel has caused 15.91 tonnes of carbon dioxide. Alternatively, you can go by the type of vehicle and the mileage. So if you haven't got your fuel usage data, you can just select, yeah, we've got mileage data instead. So you select miles, and we've done 20,000 miles in those vehicles, and that will approximate the emissions there based on a typical rigid diesel vehicle with average loading. So again, you can combine those two methods, but what you should never do is don't enter the same data don't use two different methods for the same vehicles, so you're not double counting. If you've got it for different vehicles, that's fine. And then you've got a summary at the end of this page just for transport. On recycling, this is one of the most simpler tab. You can enter your tonnage there. That is not actually affecting your results, but it feeds into your summary at the end, which I'll show you. So for recycling, the only thing that is relevant to emissions is the fuel and electricity used on that site. So you can just enter, if we're using electricity, if it's 1,000 kilowatt hours, let's make that a bit higher. It's not adding anything much, 10,000 say. If we are using diesel, because we've got some plant there, you can add that on, and it will calculate the emissions here. So let's move on to anaerobic digestion. Again, there's a bit of guidance at the top, and you'll see this at the top of every page. So again, these light green cells are the bits you need to enter your data. So you want the total tonnage of waste that is going to anaerobic digestion. So if we had 30,000 tonnes here, 100% of that is ours. It's default to 100%, but you can change it if you like. How much electricity are we using at our anaerobic digestion site? And then what fuels are we using on site as well? We might be using some of these fuels. We might be using some gas for something, I don't know, maybe not. But anyway, whatever fuels you were using, you can enter that in there and it will add it all up for the total emissions from that recycling facility. Sorry, anaerobic digestion, I should have said. Composting, again, very similar. You've got your tonnage at the top, so either open windrow or in vessel, you just put how many tons of waste are going to each of those methods. Say if we did some there and some there. If we're using grid electricity, you can add that data in if you find that data, and it will tell you the total emissions here from your composting. Mechanical biological treatment, if you are using that, again, the tonnage. So the here is where you need waste composition. Again, if I don't put anything in that, you will still get an answer based on the UK average residual waste composition. But if you do have that, even better. And again, same as the other tabs, there's a box for electricity and fuels used on the MBT site. And it will add that all up to give you your total emissions from the MBT. Incineration, again, if you are sending waste to energy from waste, in terms of emissions, it's exactly the same process. So it's energy from waste would fall under incineration. Again, you put your tonnage at the top. You can assume that if all of it's just municipal solid waste, then you might put 100% in there. Otherwise, you could leave that if the site is dealing with other types of waste as well. There's a drop-down box here if you can find out what type of incinerator it is. So let's select this to semi-continuous fluidized bed. These do make a slight difference to the results. It's not a huge difference, but it does make a small difference. Again, this is where you put your waste composition data. Now, again, here's the default composition, but if I found that actually in our waste, we'd done a composition analysis and only 30% of our waste was organic and 20% was plastics, and then let's see, what else have we got? So you need to make sure that this adds up to 100%. So if I just fill that in with some silly data at the moment just to see what happens. And again, you can put your fuel use there. So again, you scroll down and that will tell you you've got two columns here. This is on the left, the incinerator emissions using your own waste composition data, and on the right, this is what it would be with the default UK average waste composition. So you can compare the two. And there's some additional information here, which you might find interesting, or you can just ignore if not, and you can just look at your main numbers. On landfill, there's two different methods. Now, the first one, the methane commitment method, is the more straightforward method. The reason there's two methods, and you only need to use one or the other, not both, is because of the way that waste from landfill causes emissions. And because the emissions from landfill occur over several years as the waste breaks down, if you're reporting just for 1 year's emissions, it depends what you want to count. So this methane commitment method, this will count all the emissions that occur ever from the waste that is deposited this year, whereas the first order of decay method counts all the emissions that will physically occur into the atmosphere this year from all the waste that was deposited at any time in the past. So hopefully that explains why there's two different methods and you will pick one or the other. I suspect that most of you will be picking the methane commitment method because it's much more simpler to calculate. If you want the first order decay method, you will need to have your data going back to when that landfill was opened for the most accurate results, and it goes back to 1980 here. But whatever date that landfill started accepting waste, you'll need that for the most accurate. If you haven't got that, don't worry, just use the methane commitment method instead. Then you only need your current year's data. Again, you put your tonnage in there. If we're sending residual waste to landfill, you could put that in there. And then again, you can put your waste composition here, or if you can leave that blank, it will use your average UK waste composition. Again, there's a space for fuel use, similar to the other tabs. If you're using fuel for plant or equipment or anything on site, you can tell us what happens to the landfill gas. If like we might say, oh, it's flared, and that tells us the emissions from the landfill. I didn't put in a custom composition, so it hasn't put anything on this column. And then lastly, when you go to the summary tab over here, it will tell you your grand total in this table, and it will give you a nice pie chart showing where your emissions are coming from. And there's a tiny, tiny sliver for transport there, less than 1%. And in this case, obviously, it was just made up numbers that I quickly put in quickly. But with these made up numbers, the biggest source of emissions were incineration, followed by landfill. And that is it. I know I've run through that very quickly, but I hope that gives you a flavour of the tool. And I will hand back to Andrew. Thank you.
Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day.